We have to play with our kids, engage our kids. You can teach responsibility very early on.
What were some of the key things that you noticed in me?
You were just always thinking. You're your own person. You were your own person when you were a little baby.
What does love look like?
The rules are secondary to what love is. Our kids deserve to be treated the way we would want to be treated.
Now, as a parent, what do?
I had so much to learn from you. You taught me so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a quick break from our show to say a massive thank you and a big shout out to one of our amazing sponsors, Dave DiStefano. Dave is a mortgage broker with over 13 years in the business, and Dave has a great rapport with a network of lenders, including big banks, credit unions, trust companies, financial institutions, and private funds. He will work on your behalf to help you find the best mortgage with the most agreeable terms and the lowest interest rate. After meeting Dave many times and having great discussions with him, he provides a level of confidence and comfort in knowing that he is going to take care of you. If you want to reach out to Dave, you can find his office on 6293 Thoroldstone Road in Niagara Falls. For more information or to make an appointment for any of your mortgage needs, call 905-933-1090. That's 905-933-1090. And thanks for listening. Back to the show.
What's going on, Meeting Gold listeners? It's Chris Battaglia, 416 Coffee. Use the coupon code Meeting Gold to get 10% off your first order at 416 Coffee. Enjoy the show.
So we're doing a special podcast. I'm interviewing my mother, and this is mainly because I get this question a lot, and it's around the idea of, well, who raised you? And it's a compliment to my parents, but the relationship that I have with my mom has interestingly developed over the last, I would say, 5 years. And we have both grown and learned a lot from it. But more importantly, I'm really curious to know what intentional things were done to raise me as a child for me to become the person that I am, young and ambitious. I'm really curious. So I'm kind of dissecting myself. Mother, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we always do at the beginning of every single episode is we ask the last guest what question they have for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Okay.
So the question that we asked Nick, and this is the question that Nick asked you was...
Did he know it was me he was asking?
No, he didn't.
Oh, okay.
He didn't. That's the whole point.
I see. Okay.
It's really special that way. So who is the person that you look up to, and what trait do you admire? This could be a celebrity, somebody around you. Your next question is going to be dead or alive, I'm assuming. I would probably say alive or dead. It doesn't matter.
Boy, that really puts me on the spot. Who is the person that I look up to? I would have to say my sister.
Why? Auntie Joe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because she's just the most amazing human being that I know personally. That's affected my life. She's the most sacrificial person, and she has been that all my life.
In what way? I mean, you guys grew up together, so are there some early stories, I guess, that make you reflect back on how she has impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots and lots of stories, but I think because my parents died when I was young and I was single at the time, my sister really, and Uncle Fred, her husband, really just took care of me in a way that I needed family at that time. And because I didn't live, where my whole family lived, I was I just felt very alone. And but even before that, Uncle Fred and Auntie Jo were just always there for me. If there was anybody that I would call, it would be them. She has always been there for me.
I know you've talked about your parents being there for you, but it seems like they were there for you in a different way.
This is back, we talk about parenting or how you were raised. This is back, and I think your dad would agree, this was a different type of parenting. It was very non-emotional. Like, parenting back then was different, I think, than it is now.
Yeah. And it's just a quick jump in there. It's interesting how even Dad was raised as well. Two completely different countries, completely different families and cultures, yet the one underlying, continuous was you weren't best friends with your parents.
No, that's very true. And the other thing is, in my upbringing, because I was Dutch and your dad's Italian, they're very different in that way too. So in my upbringing, when you turned 18, you were expected to move out. Like, that was just what you did. Like, whether it be for school or for whatever, you were expected to move out. Whereas your dad, Italians, they tend to live at home until they're married. So if someone's 30 and they haven't been married, they're still living at home. So it's an interesting dynamic. I've definitely, after having you and Esther and raising you, definitely lean more toward the Italian way. That way, I've really changed in that. And in terms of being friends or with your kids, my style of parenting is very, very different than how I was raised. And your dad would say the same. But it doesn't mean that my parents were bad parents in the least. That's not what I'm saying. But I think I learned from their mistakes. But I don't want to suggest that they were bad parents, because they weren't.
Well, I will say that, and we've had this conversation, by no means, are you perfect? By no means am I perfect. Everybody learns from everybody. And you have openly said, having kids changes your life and makes you, like, I remember when you had us, I remember being young, and I remember you were a lot more strict, 10, 12 years ago. Now it's completely adjusted. So obviously kids have kind of loosened the reins a little bit, and that outlook, differing from your parents' way. What I find interesting is, if I look back from my perspective, your parents raised you. I know exactly how your parents raised you, because, the school that I went to in elementary school is very similar. Like, a lot of Dutch families, you see how they're raised, very sheltered, grow up, your mistakes are your mistakes, I'm not going to help you, kind of thing, right? And what I found interesting is, when I look at that perspective, I see how you adjusted over those 10 years and really grew to taking some of those lessons, but also knowing who you wanted to be as a mother. And there's a lot of learning lessons that happen from when you grow up with your parents, just like what I've learned from you and Dad, and things I would do the same and things I would do different. It's interesting how different generations, you learn so much, right? Would you say that each new generation is a positive learning experience?
You mean in terms of parenting?
Yeah, in terms of just being better parents.
I don't know. I think that I have a very, just my own perspective on parenting, on being a mom. And it isn't based on even what my parents did or how other parents have done it. So generationally, I don't really know how to answer that, because it wasn't that I followed anybody else. I parented how I felt led to parent in my heart. And it wasn't that I read a lot of books. A lot of people read books, and I didn't. It was just within me.
My next question to that, what in your childhood influenced you to be the type of mother that you are? Because you are different than a lot. I mean, every mother's different, but from when I was growing up, you were very different from, the mother, like the Dutch mom, that I knew. Like, I can think of a select few examples of other people that I grew up with that I knew their parents were very strict and did not change. You were not like that when raising us, and you changed, even in my opinion, even for the better. Like, you became more of a friend, not like just like this, like, you know, I'm looking up figure.
What's interesting, when you started the show, you said that our relationship has, over the past 5 years, significantly grown. And I understand you saying that for your age, but I wouldn't say that for me with my relationship with you. My relationship with you started the second I found out I was carrying you. That's when my relationship started with you.
So what, I guess, things did you do intentionally at an early age with me to influence because you have said that I am, you know, what you intended in raising me, and I'm happy to say that. It's a props to you. But what things intentionally did you do?
So you're not everything. You certainly do things that I don't agree with.
Oh, absolutely.
But I believe those are your choices, and you're an adult now, and I don't have to agree with everything you do. So for me, if I look back on my life at the most significant thing that ever happened to me, or the most significant day in my life, was when I found out that I was pregnant with you. And I would have to, on a side note, say, as well as Esther, right? Your sister. But we're talking about you. And you're my firstborn. It changed everything for me. Absolutely everything. And the other thing I think it's important to point out is that I didn't get pregnant with you until I was 36. Women tend to have babies a lot younger. I was older. I had worked and was an independent woman for years. I got my university. So I didn't get married until I was 32. So I had kind of lived life. I've done all the other things. And I was ready for you. And yeah, it was just absolutely amazing. It was the defining moment of my life. And let me also just add that, you know, some people, like, I really never understood this idea of waiting till the baby's born to find out what it is, you know, boy or gets a surprise. I never had that take. I knew the second I was pregnant with you that I had a human being growing inside of me. And I felt instantly connected to you. I wanted to know the second I found out that you were a boy. I named you. I prayed for you. I prayed for who you would marry someday. I began praying for you from the time you were in my womb. And I was bonded to you in those 9 months. And I couldn't wait to meet you. It was...
So my follow-up to that is, my realization is, it sounds like, you know, my head immediately goes to, right when I was born, what were the intentional things that you did? But it started long before that.
Oh, yeah.
Which, yeah, I guess a mother can only understand the bonding that happens in those 9 months of, you know, that child growing. But was there a intent in raising me? Like, you know, when I was being raised, was it like, I want him to be raised this way and have these personality traits and, you know, talk to people this way? Or, like, I am a strong believer that you're a product of your parents in a lot of ways. Like, really, you are. Now, how much, I guess, you know, say you have 5 traits to you and dad has 5 traits to you. What traits do I pick up and what traits kind of merge together? And
I think that those come, yes, I agree with you, but I think that those come from you watching us. That's what I believe.
So, interesting. So
yeah,
it's almost unintentional.
Yeah, I didn't have any intention of how you would turn out. So from the second I met you and held you in my hands, I wanted to know you. I wanted to, and it was frustrating when you were a baby, when you couldn't talk. Like, it was very frustrating for me because I wanted to talk with you. I wanted to know what you were thinking. And so my whole journey with you as a mom, I think this is where maybe how I parent is different. It's just me. But you say, was I intentional in developing you? I really wasn't. I had a desire to know you.
Like a genuine interest.
Yes, in everything that you did. I could see when you were thinking about things that I'd say, Samuel, what are you thinking about? And we would talk, and it's, I have this one memory that is really precious to me. You weren't even talking. You were 2 years old, and I remember you sitting out the window, just staring out the window. And I was just watching you thinking, what is he staring at? And so I finally looked out the window to see, because I wanted to see how long you would sit there. And you sat there for a good 15 minutes just watching. Finally, it was all construction trucks coming that you were watching. So I piled you into the car with Esther, and we drove out to the construction site, and we got a lawn chair, and we just sat there and watched the construction because you were interested in that. And that made me interested in it. I loved watching you and Esther and getting to know you. I didn't have an agenda. I didn't have, I think parents don't spend enough time getting to know their kids. I think we tend to force what we think onto our kids.
Yeah.
We tend to shape them from what our ideas are. I didn't take that. I wanted to know you. I had so much to learn from you. You taught me so much. You taught me patience. You taught me how to have fun. You taught me how to stay present in the moment. I've learned so much from you. And I'm so thankful for you in my life. You taught me what love is just by being in my life. That you were.
What is interesting is your outlook is very different than I think most mothers, especially young mothers. I think that came with maybe a little bit of seniority in you having me. But what I do find interesting is a lot of moms or young moms, I'll see, nope, they're going to eat this and this and this. They are, they're in daycare these days, even if they're stay at home, they're still in daycare for certain days. Mm-hmm. You can only do this, you can only do that. And there has to be some level of discipline, of course. And you had that with us. And I think that taught me a lot as well. But without genuine interest, it almost feels like it's I have to obey type of person, like relationship.
Yeah, it's funny because maybe you remember, but I don't really recall, as you got older, some parents would ground you, or I've never had to do that with you. And you were not easy. You drove me crazy because you were so busy and into everything. You were so curious about everything, and you were exhausting. There's no question. So it's not that it was like easy when I say, oh, I learned from you and all these things. Though sometimes learning is hard. You were everywhere all the time. So you taught me patience because I had to learn to be patient because you were so busy, right? So
do you think a lot of parents look at having kids as a learning lesson for them?
I don't know, but how I'll answer that is when I give the example of you taught me patience, you were so busy. My feeling is, and I might get scolded or whatever for this, is that parents don't want to deal with that. So thus daycare, thus babysitters,
TV,
or whatever
video
else.
Games, yeah.
TV, video games, because it's exhausting. And I am a huge advocate for being a stay-at-home mom. I won't apologize for it. I just believe children need to be raised by a parent in the home. That's what I believe. And I believe that children need that security. And I think that's really important. So
I've always wondered, the younger a child is, the more that they strive for, I believe it's a testament to confidence and room for mistakes. And I think that if you boil that down to right from the get-go, I was given room for mistakes. I was given a sense of confidence because I do think that I don't know exactly what plays to this. I'm just trying to think out loud, but I was given a sense of confidence by you by taking an interest in what I was doing. And I think that that really played a role in building a subconscious level of confidence as I got older. I mean, it's one thing to say you're going to try to be more confident, but it's another thing to just be raised with being instilled with a level of confidence. I think it's completely different. When you see parents raising children, you said, you know, they have an agenda. They seem to have a list of things, and it's a very systematic approach. Do you think that you took that systematic approach with some things? Or was it very creatively flowing?
With certain things I did, because, you know, like this is maybe a silly example. I wouldn't let you watch SpongeBob SquarePants.
I remember that.
You remember that. Because it was an age appropriate thing. So definitely I was strict. I know I was. Music.
Call of Duty.
Yeah, music, Call of Duty, I wouldn't allow that. But it's not that I wouldn't allow it forever. You know, when you got older, then we eased the reins a little bit, right? But I also never just said, you can't do that. And if you asked, well, why not? I wouldn't say because. We would sit down and talk about it.
And I actually, just a testament, that rings a lot of memories, because I remember if you did say because and I said why, we would sit down and it would be a conversation for the most part. I remember that because I remember if I would get frustrated at like, well, why? There was a level of, okay, well, here's why. And then I could have a conversation about it. Now, as a parent, what do you do? Because your kid is going to, you know, throw stuff at you that you're like, well, because I said so. At the end of the day, that's what it is. But I don't recall you saying that.
Yeah, I don't think that I had to, because sometimes you would help me see a different side of it. And so then I would say,
see, I think that comes from the openness of learning.
Yeah, so then I would say, okay, then let's try it. Or I can't think of an example on the spot, but then I might say, okay, well, let's try it for a week and see how it goes. In fact, no, I can think of an example, because Call of Duty, that's what I did. I did not think that was a good game, but I know all your friends were doing it, and I wasn't sure. And so I think how we resolved it was, okay, let's give it a go for 2 weeks. And if I see any behavior changes in you, anger issues, then we're going to take a pause. And you agreed to that. But I never wanted to punish unfairly. I didn't want to discipline unfairly. I don't, because it's not fair. And I think that parents, like we deserved it. Our kids deserve to be treated the way we would want to be treated. Just because they're young or little I can't abuse my authority over you. I believe that's why we have so many angry teenagers, confused teenagers, lonely teenagers. Suicide is high because parents aren't listening, and they're just ruling over children and leaving no room for talk about it. And let me just add the other part of it. I was never, I would not always, but always try to apologize to you. If I hurt you, or I spoke out of turn, or I embarrassed you, I would come and I just apologized to you this morning, for heaven's sake.
I think there's a level of respect that gets shown when you apologize. Like, because I was never one to make like the first, initial, I'm sorry. I started to do that when I realized you would say you're sorry when you feel like you did something wrong. And most of the times you were right. But when you didn't come and say sorry right away, it actually instilled in me, making me think, okay, maybe I did do something wrong. I also think that as you get older, you understand your parents a lot more. But one of and this comes down to like personality traits. And I think what makes me frustrated is when parents say that they don't have control over what their kid has become. That makes me frustrated, because that's a product of you. It really is. In my opinion, in most ways. When it came to work ethic and working and drive and motivation, one of the things that really sticks with me is I was big into playing Minecraft all the time when I was in grade 8, grade 9, and like grade 10. And I remember wanting to buy something on the game for like $40. And I had gone up to you, and like any kid expected you to buy it for me, you know, because why can't you? And I thought, hey, can you please go, can we please get this? Please, 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 right? Just like I would beg for Wendy's Frosty or whatever you have it. And I remember you saying to me, well, no, but I can give you an opportunity to work for it. And that to me, I was pissed. I was. But
Because you hated pulling weeds.
I hated pulling weeds for $10 an hour. Yes. But it showed a level of not no, but like, hey, this is the real world and you're not going to like it. And for that first little while, you don't like the real world because it's not all centered around you, right? Because as a child, you're raised as everything's centered around you. And then when you're maybe like approaching 6, 7, or 8, you start to realize whether or not it is or it isn't. And then around that 10, 12 mark, that's when you start to act out on whether you think it is or it isn't. In my opinion, I don't know. I'm curious, the first stage of my development, my growth, like from like being born to say 3 or 4 years old, what were some of the key things that you noticed in me? Not whether it made me good or a bad person now, but just key notes in me that I guess parents can be more attentive to in those early years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, you know, just listening even at that age. You were huge into drawing. You drew like you love drawing. And we would sit down and it was a way that I discovered who you were through your drawing, because we would sit down and talk about those pictures that you drew. And then I would write what you would tell me, and they're kind of hilarious to look at now, write what those pictures were, because you were just always thinking. Even at a very young age, like with the truck construction that I example earlier. But I think that, just spending time and listening, books were huge for me, reading books. We'd sit down and read and point to pictures, and time spent playing with you. Like, we have to play with our kids, engage our kids. I feel like we're so dismissive of our children. I loved being with you and Esther. I loved it. I miss it now. I miss you. I just loved every moment with you guys. And it was hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, being a stay-at-home mom. It's exhausting. And the pressure to perform. I mean, you say pressure to perform in your job. Do you know what it is to be a mom trying to raise your kids right? That's pressure. Because what if they don't turn out, right?
What defines turning out, though?
Well, I guess turn out to me.
Like, what's the line?
So for me, the line is, and it always has been, that you and Esther are just responsible. I don't need you to, there are things that, I pick my battles on what I'm going to harp on now that you guys are older and adults now. But that you were responsible. And that was my only thing all the time. Even when you were little with your toys, I would have a system. You can't take out new toys until you put the old ones away. You can teach responsibility very early on. But I would make games out of it. I would have it be fun. We would cook together. We'd do all those kind of things because I would make you responsible for those things. And I took the time to teach you. If you wanted cookies, okay, we'll make cookies, but you're going to help me. You're going to learn to measure. You're going to break the eggs in. I have pictures of you 2, 3 years old doing those things. So even then, those to me is teaching responsibility and letting you know that you are capable of these things. You can do these things. I don't have to do them for you. I don't have to crack that egg in that bowl for you. You can do it. And you might take 10 tries, and I might have to clean up a lot of eggs, but you can do it. Little accomplishments along the way. It's funny that you give that example of the pulling weeds thing, because I made you pay for your own Ottawa trip in 8th grade, and that was $600. And if you wanted to go, you had to pay for all of it, and you did. And you insisted on paying for part of your dad's trip too. And because you were working at that time, You were in Air Cadets. I expected from you and Esther, I expected the two of you to be responsible.
And it's a sense of empowerment when you give us opportunities like that. Like, there is a level of empowerment and not this I need to kneel on you. Because at the end of the day, the goal of parenting is to raise a child to around that 20-year-old age where they don't necessarily need you anymore. But there are definitely kids out there who rely very heavily on their parents for not just financially, but emotionally, mentally. They don't seek knowledge. They aren't responsible with decision making, right? They're still doing I won't say examples, but they're still doing stupid decisions that are clearly affecting their life, but they just weren't showed any differently. What in your childhood made you realize you had to show examples as a parent? Because I think a lot of parents don't see it as examples. They just see it as like, I'm going to teach you this by telling you this. No, it's through actually your own actions as a parent.
Yeah, unfortunately, I grew up where it was like that, where, if I didn't, then there would be severe consequences. Like I grew up with that. And the harder part of it was all sort of packaged in, like religion, right? Like, and so that made sort of my understanding of God and everything was a very strict disciplinarian, cracking a whip and all that. And if you didn't do that, then and through that and coming to, and I guess meeting you for the first time made me realize, I wasn't going to go that route. Because when you came into my life, I didn't feel the responsibility to shape you or mold you or have you turn out a certain way. I felt that my number one responsibility in raising you was to show you what love looked like.
I'll let you talk bad about me. Does a circumstance or a story come to mind that was a big, in your opinion, learning lesson for me?
For you?
At a younger age.
Well, I can think a lot of those, but I think, a lot of those are private. So the one that initially comes to mind is when you were probably 3 or 4 years old, and we had gone to a thrift shop, and you had stolen a little soldier or something, put it in your pocket, and when we got home, you came and showed it to me. And I don't know if you felt guilty or if you were just showing, I don't recall, but I remember asking you, where did you get this? Because I didn't buy this for you. And you confessed that you took it. And, you got to remember, you two were little. I had a big double stroller, 2 car seats. I'd just gotten y'all out of the car. And so I packed you both back up into the car, and we drove back to this thrift store. And even at that age, I made you go to the counter and give it to her and apologize for taking it. And I remember that woman coming out and not believing that I had made you do that. So, from a very young age, I made you take responsibility for making wrong choices. But I didn't present it as this big, you shouldn't have done that, or we talked about it. But I did definitely go to the extreme of making you be responsible for things, because that's what life is about. Like we have to take responsibility for our choices, good or bad. We're responsible for our own choices. It's not my fault if you make a bad choice just because I'm your mom. But where the whole love aspect comes in is that I will be here for you no matter what, and I'll love you no matter what.
I think there is a level of unconditional love that has to be shown to every single kid in order for them to feel like, they're appreciated.
Yep, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. We package love in this, you behave this way or else. And that's not what love does.
That's curious, the new generation of parents, they are 22, 23. I'm curious to ask you, what things do you think are wrong with the generation to influence new younger parents? Like what things are wrong?
Well, I mean, these are all just my opinions. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I'm just saying when you ask me why did you turn out the way you did, this is my story. What I would say is I think the whole idea of being a stay-at-home mom is frowned upon. And I think it's looked down on, and I think that is really too bad. Because I don't think anybody else should be raising your kids except you. And I think women are on their own pursuit to pursue careers and everything, and that's fine. But maybe you should reconsider having kids if you're going to put them in daycare all day. Now, I understand there's some moms who have to, like they don't have a choice, and my heart goes out to those kind of situations. But for the times that you can be with your children, then be present with them. That is, to me, the biggest thing is parents aren't present with their kids. They don't play with them. They don't engage them. They don't sit with them. They're dismissing them even at home, even when they are there. They're putting them in front of the TV, and with technology the way it is, I don't do social media. Even to this day, I don't. You never saw me doing that because I never did it. And you won't ever see me doing it because that's not who I want to be. I don't want to get lost in that.
I will say, I think there's a level of appreciation that kids gain as they get older. And that is shown through the parenting style in maybe say the first 10 years of that level of appreciation, right? I'm really curious, like when you were raising myself and Esther, how much pressure did you feel to just do a good job? And did you find that sometimes you let that influence your decision making in say it like a negative way? And the reason I'm asking this is because I think a lot of mothers on the flip side do feel this way.
Oh yeah, I'm sure I felt that way. Like what comes to mind is you went through this awful biting stage where even at the Y I was asked to not bring you anymore because you were biting everybody. And so it was embarrassing, but yeah, I don't know. I think it always got balanced because I just loved being with you guys so much. I never felt pressure. I definitely would have parents say I was a helicopter mom or those kind of things.
Well, I remember that. I remember that. And I guess and my mind goes to like, is the hack to just having a good, that's where my mind goes is what's the hack to having a child who, just having a good relationship with your kids or with your mom? Like what is the hack? And my mind goes to the answer is just as a mom or even just parents in general, appreciate time spent with your kids and just put your phone away, be present. That's it. And you're good. You will have a great relationship with your child. Is that like the hack, I guess?
I don't know that there is, but I just think that parents spend far too much time using their kids to fill their own needs and to sort of heal themselves through their children, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think that our children are not little mini me's of us, and our children are independent thinkers. They are a separate human being of me as you're your own person. You were your own person when you were a little baby. So I always saw you as that. So I didn't need you to agree with me all the time. I didn't need you to dress the way I thought you should dress, and I think that too many parents are trying to
structure
what they think so that they can look good, right? You turned out great. I'm proud of you. I don't always like the language you use, but that's your choice. I don't take that as a reflection on my parenting. That's your choice. In my opinion, you're on your phone way too much. You didn't see that in me, but that's your choice. I don't see that as a reflection on me. I'm not worried if Susie down the street is thinking, oh, what kind of mother was she? I don't care. I didn't care what anybody thought about how I parented.
I guess that's a level, like, I couldn't understand that. Especially, I think it's really tough within the mother world, because I know you're in like mother groups and whatnot, and I'm sure that those conversations were had a lot. Like, oh, my kid did this today, my kid did that today. Oh, how did you handle it? And it was very just like sheltered and looked down on. I'm curious because I've made this comment a few times. A child is a product of their parents, and I know your opinion on it isn't fully 100% true. Like, yes, Sam, you are right. It's more, maybe it sounds like you're more of a 50-50. Well, there's only so much you can do. Let me ask you this. What level of innate, or how much is innately put in a kid to be raised responsibly, to be raised well, or just to be a good person, be a responsible person, versus what is built through time with parents?
Yeah, I think a part that answers that is, I think, something that I was always very aware of is that you and Esther were watching us, always watching us. And so you were absorbing how your dad and I lived. And I believe that you're as social as you are because you saw that in your dad and me. I wasn't trying to make you social. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like,
which is interesting.
Yeah. And I think Esther, she used to be a lot more shy. As she gets older, she's a lot more social because she sees that in all of us. Like, so I think that's part of just the environment. But yeah, you were always watching your dad and me, and I always knew that. So that helped shape part of who you are, with little or no of my control of trying to put that in you.
Right. I'm curious. You mentioned, you knew we were watching you. When you were watching your parents, what did you think?
So, yeah, the things that stand out about my parents, again, I don't, my parents had an amazing marriage. My father absolutely adored my mother. And so I saw just a man who just doted, and they just were so beautiful that way together. So that's what really stands out in my mind. Not so much that they're parenting on me. I don't recall, like, my mom wouldn't sit down and play. I remember one time when she sat down and colored with me. But my dad had cancer. There were so many things. I was the youngest of 4 children. I mean, she must have been absolutely exhausted. So that's where I think Auntie Jo, my sister, really, why I have more memories of that. My mother she had so much going on. So what stands out to me is not so much their parenting style, but them as a married couple. What they gave me in terms of that, how a man should treat a woman, how they just work together. I never recall them having an argument, ever.
Really?
I don't ever remember them yelling at each other. Not ever. And my dad had a temper, but not with my mom. They just didn't fight.
That's interesting. I didn't put that into perspective. I feel like there's 3 things that a kid, other than their what they're innately born with, but their mom, their dad, and the relationship. Those 3 things. Mm-hmm. Those are the 3 things that also influence, who you are, because you are different than dad and dad's different than you. Mm-hmm. Your relationship is also different than both of you, mm-hmm. right? Because it's 2 of you combined. And how that, conspires through also plays an interesting role into what the kid becomes, right?
Oh, yeah, and I think that I don't think it's talked enough about that in terms of, yes, you're watching me as a mother, you're watching your dad as a father, but you're also watching us as a married couple. And that's hugely significant. So, yeah, the 3 factor in a big way in terms of how you're going to view relationships. It's very significant.
And at the end of the day, relationships do, like, those change you in ways. Like, while I was in high school or when I was in elementary school, you know, yes, I had relationships with you guys, but I also had relationships with other kids around me. Do you think that there's a level of me watching your relationship and how I treat other people around me? Like, does that also play an influence?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I was very strict on who you hung out with early on.
Yeah, I remember that.
Like,
yeah.
you couldn't just go to anybody's house. I would definitely much rather have kids come to our house unless I knew the parents. I would never let you go to a house where I didn't know the parents. Yeah, so in those early years, which you probably don't remember a lot of that, but I was actually quite strict. But I don't remember it ever being a problem with you.
I remember giving some backlash, but I think that was just me testing my bounds like any other kid. You know, they're always going to kind of test how far they can get, right, before they get, like, seriously punished. And I think that's just natural. What I do find interesting, and well, I want to go back because you had said you had me when you were 36. It's not very common anymore. I mean, you see married couples having.
It never was really common.
It never was, but especially now, it's kids are had very, very young. You know, parents are maybe between 20 and 25, right? Or, you know, say they're around 30. My immediate question stemming from that is, are you ever ready to have kids? Because it sounds like me and Esther were a big undertaking. Was that something you could have possibly prepared for? And is that something that somebody could be ready to have?
Oh, yeah. That's just the way my life played out. I'm not saying I'm, you know, like, people should wait till they're 36. My goodness, I won't. No, that's not, my life didn't play out in that way, in any way that I wanted. But I just didn't meet, you know, anybody in my 20s. And so that's just, quite honestly, I think if you can find someone young and get married, I think that's beautiful. That was all my siblings did that, and they have incredible marriages and kids and all of that. My life just didn't play out that way. So for me, that was God's plan, and it worked out. I can't imagine having had kids in my 20s.
Yeah. Well, your 20s was very different than the majority of a 20-year-old.
Yeah, I didn't take the traditional path. So
moved out young, you lost your parents young, you were working numerous amounts of jobs to make ends meet.
I lived in a big city. I went to university. I can't imagine knowing what I know now of parenting. I mean, when you decide to have a baby, you better lock down for the next 18 years, because that's what it is. So some people don't want to hear it that way, but yeah.
What would be one piece of advice as we close off? I've got two more questions for you, but what would be one piece of advice you give to mothers just in general? I mean, this whole podcast was a whole piece of advice, but one thing that you could really stress.
I think to give yourself a break. You are not responsible for how your kids turn out in the end game. Your only responsibility is to love your children. But let me say, this whole term going around, love is love. No, it's not. Love is defined. Love is defined. And it's clearly defined in a famous book. That's what I'll say about that. So, love your children. And that's freeing. That's freeing.
What does love look like?
Well, yeah, love is patient. It's kind. It doesn't envy. It keeps no record of wrong. It forgives. It's long suffering. It's all those things. And I think that it's not about the rules. And I'm not saying I'm against rules. I'm just saying the path of love is, the rules are secondary to what love is.
All right, I've got my last question for you.
All right. I thought that was the last question.
That was the last. Well, it should have been technically. Question for the next guest. You have no idea who they are.
Okay, what would be my question for the next guest? So
it's tough because you have no idea who they are. It's a very general question.
Yeah. So I guess I'm much more of a. Okay, I'll make it a fun question. Is that fair?
Yeah, you could do that.
Do you want it to be a deep, like?
Well, the deep ones
meaningful?
help. The deep ones help ease into the conversation because I'm not the one asking it. But I'll let you ask what you want to ask, and we'll.
Okay,
we'll
well, I'll
make it
give
work.
you two, and then you can decide.
All right, you can give me
Okay.
two.
Okay, what was your favorite childhood toy? That's the fun one.
You always want to ask that.
Because I love it. I think it tells so much about a person. And the deeper question would be, what is the purpose of your existence?
That's very loaded. Where does that stem from?
That question?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's the question of life. What is the purpose of your existence? It's what I asked, when you were born. It's all ties together.
Well, Mom, I appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll probably do this again because 45 minutes flew by like nothing. Thank you, everybody listening and watching. I'm trusting that you learned a thing or two. I know I definitely did. And this was more of just an eye-opening conversation I wanted to have and figure out, I guess, from a third-person perspective, who I was, how I became who I am, and what things were put into place, what things were done intentionally, what things were not done intentionally, what is innately built in somebody, what is not, what is built through time and experience and memories. I guess it's all a big question.
Yeah, and let me just add on to that. This is just my story and my journey.
It's different for everybody.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for listening or watching, or doing both. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube or on our social media for questions for the next golden guest, like my mom sitting in the golden chair.
I love you, Samuel.
Okay, all right. On that note, we'll see you guys next episode. Cheers.